Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Good morning. I said little boys and girls. Maybe that would be more appropriate. For those of you, you're going to hear a lot from me. I'll try not to drag on, but my name is Christopher Ludwig. I'm the editor of Automotive Logistics and Finished Vehicle Logistics, and I work very closely with Louis Yakumi, unfortunately, on our global set of conferences. And of course, I'm very glad to be here in California. Maybe less glad to be in this room with all of you. No, I'm joking. Just quickly, this is session 2A, Invest, Reshape, and Optimize, looking at network optimization. If anybody was actually looking for the damage related to risk and quality, that's in the other room. So hope you're all meant to be here, and even if not, now you're stuck with us. So we'll try and make it worth your while. So we had, I thought, a really good first session. Obviously, it's always good to get a sense of the figures behind the industry, some of the trends and factors that are driving us. And I think some of those things, again, the continued shift to production to Mexico, the model mix towards trucks and SUVs, some of that I think is quite relevant to what we will talk about here when we look at networks and we look at how you plan those flows. Obviously, low oil prices and poor commodities also having a big impact on the finished vehicle network. When Louis gave his intro, his mind seems to wander to other things, like when ladies drop their trousers on boats and stuff. But I remember most of these conferences where we've often been here talking about some sort of crisis around capacity, whether it was a Japanese earthquake back in 2011 or whether it was a shortage of trucks or a big truck strike that had sort of pulled a lot of capacity out, I think, the year after. 2 years ago, we would have been here screaming murder at the railroads about, the polar vortex until we learned a little bit more about how some of those flows understand. Last year, I think everyone was a little bit nervous, wondering what the winter was going to bring, whether the forecasts were going to be as bad. But of course, here we are, and I think rather than a crisis, it's probably unprecedented in some ways in terms of the relative stability. I'm not sure. Still growing sales, or relatively growing sales, low oil prices, a commodities market that has completely changed many dynamics about the railroad network and certainly the service and flows we're seeing across automotive. I think Mexico imports into the U.S. are actually down this year. It's one of the things Brian and I talked about. So not that we don't expect that to grow, but I'm not sure that there's a big crisis at the border either. So, that kind of brings us back a little bit to that theme, as Sarah Amico talked about so well in the first session and the conference. So while the sun is shining. That theme partly came from a discussion that I had earlier this year as well with Mark Brazeau from Fiat Chrysler, head of vehicle logistics, about how do you prepare the network in these good times to when it might change, because commodities do go up and down, and times sales do go up and down. So what can we do to prepare for the future? And I think in many ways that's what our session here today is going to look at. We're going to look at some innovations, look at technology, and look at what we can do as an industry collaborating to keep things as stable as we can, and also probably to prepare for when things aren't as rosy as they might be today. You all had lots of questions in the first session. That bodes really well for me. You can make it quite nice and easy for me. But if not, obviously we'll keep that going, because we are going to have one presentation and then a couple of comments, but otherwise we're going to spend most of the time here having a dialogue and discussion. We think that's probably the best way to tackle this. Let me introduce everyone on our panel. You've heard from him slightly, or you heard of him at least in the first session. Bill Pawluk, the Chief Executive Officer of Convertible Trailer Manufacturers. Bill will give us a presentation momentarily. We're also joined by Dennis Mann, some of you who would have known him here for several years and wearing slightly different colors. Dennis Mann's now Chief Operating Officer at Road and Rail. We're also pleased to have with us Lee Hansen, Senior Buyer, focused on vehicle logistics at Nissan. And last but not least, and I wrote down the name in a phonetical way, Luca Kolcaj from, did I get that right? Yep. Good. Manager of Finished Vehicle Operations from FCA, also joining us on the panel. So we've got a great mix here of providers, some innovative providers, IT solutions, and car makers, so look forward to discussion. Now I'd like to hand it over to Bill.
Thank you. Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, Bill Pawluk. I'm from Canada, Western Canada, Calgary. And I'm here to tell you about what we think, what we can do to help contribute from a perspective of networks and network optimization, perhaps. Even though our project has perhaps little to do with networks, or it might seem that way at first appearance. Anyhow, rethinking networks. This is something that we think is necessary for us to consider, because we think there's, with all this new technology and interconnectivity, that there must be some way of us to use those new benefits. I think it's a highly underdeveloped and underutilized aspect of what we do today. The underlying problem is what I believe is what everybody's talking about here. The purpose of this conference is to somehow find ways to improve today's logistics situation. We all know that there's a tremendous underutilization of auto carrier assets because they are built specifically for transporting finished vehicles. And we all know that there's tremendous empty miles in today's runs. And it's nice. If there was good balance in automotive flows around the world, then there's no need for me to be here. But we've tried to conquer this problem for years and years and years, and we still have only brought down those numbers by small percentage points. Underutilization of auto carrier assets around the world. This is the focus and how it relates now to the network discussion. You guys are all familiar with these sites all around the world. I've been everywhere, and this exists everywhere. Networks have been around for a long time. Of course, they're a lot more complex today, a lot more sophisticated, and give us new abilities that were never ever available before. 1957, SPUTNIK was launched. This was considered to be some sort of, we'll say, aggressive situation back in those days, where suddenly somebody could actually see what's going on in your country from outer space. And so this was considered by the US as a very serious problem. Advanced Research Project Agency Network was developed in the 60s so that we could understand how to fight back against these potential threats. The Internet of Things. It's where the digital world connects to the physical and intellectual world through a complex matrix of systems upon systems. That's the stage that we're at now. This has been an ongoing process now that's been developing at a seemingly snail's pace, or in the background. We don't actually really notice it, but then all of a sudden, it's all around us. It's amazing. You drive through Shanghai today, and you can see these big billboards above you on the freeways, and it shows you all the green routes and the yellow routes and the red routes. And you want to head towards the green routes, of course. You don't want to be caught in a traffic jam. So these are systems that are all integrated with each other. And now, in a proactive fashion, we're able to reroute and not add an hour or two to our day. And this exists, of course. There's many examples of it throughout the US and Europe, et cetera. Everyone's familiar with GPS, another innovation, military innovation. 1983. In the 1990s, the internet had become available, where it connected people at a basic consumer level or personal level. But these were all originally initiatives through the military. And then telematics, early 2000s. We're all familiar with that. I'm certainly not an expert in it, but we know that various components, each of these possesses certain characteristics that if we put these things together, imagine what we could do. The physical internet, transforming the way physical objects are handled, moved, stored, realized, supplied, and used, aiming towards global efficiency and sustainability. So what we're doing, we want to put it, for lack of a better term, put it on steroids, if you will. certainly maybe a bad example, but anyhow, we want to improve what we're doing today in a far more efficient fashion. And the technology today does exist. I don't know how this slide got in here, but apparently it's funny. The 100-year-old bad habit, I call it. Trucks going out full, trains going out full, ships going out full, coming back empty, reload and repeat, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's just a bad habit, nothing more than that. And it's not to criticize anybody in the room for doing it, but it's time to reevaluate it because today's technology is now going to allow us to do something better. We all know that 40 to 50% of our miles are empty. Why do we continue this? We need to ask ourselves that. It's time for us to change. We can ignore it, and there's a danger in ignoring something. Eventually, it's going to come back to bite you. Risk. What's the risk in doing something new? I use this slide in particular. By the way, I'm a career firefighter from the city of Calgary, and I want to thank the California Fire Service for all the help that they provided during the Fort McMurray fires. Fire now is 70% under control. People are returning back to the city of Fort McMurray. Little segue, but thanks again to the California community for their help. I use this slide, though, because we know that if we identify a particular problem, we need to figure out step by step the solution to it. If you rush headlong into this problem, into the fire, if you will, you're certainly going to die. You're not going to survive that episode. But amazingly, we can actually control situations like this, step by step through training and methodology, strategies, tactics, teamwork, continuous training. We deal with these kind of matters all the time. But this is already well after the fact. This is when everything went wrong and we couldn't predict. It's sometimes just an accident upon an accident, coincidences that take place. This is the rarity of situations. And it's really no different than what we're facing today in automotive logistics. We have a problem, an underlying problem here, underutilization of existing assets. We need to perhaps get together, and I mean get together. There's 380,000 firefighters in North America, and they get together through the International Association of Firefighters, and they talk about best practices, much like what we're doing here today. We need to get together and talk about the very same issues that are common to all of us more and figure out how we can conquer this beast, because it's a beast. It's a big one. And we certainly can't do it alone. What we can do is provide some of the solutions, but everybody understands their situation better themselves from their perspective. And we are looking for those perspectives. So what's the risk in doing something different? What's the risk in not? That's my question. We have to meet these problems head on, of course. There's no point skirting around them. It's right in our face every day. One of the key things that did happen on December 4th, 2015 is the FAST Act was signed off by President Obama. The now convertibility, along with a couple other legislations that were passed, convertibility is now legal to be used with Stinger systems throughout North America. So that's a big development and great news, of course. It came somewhat unexpectedly. We really didn't expect it to happen until after the election, but lo and behold, the House got together and they agreed on something, and it was fantastic news for us. So we're now moving forward, trying to bring new product to the marketplace so we can start practicing this. Now, going back to networks, data collection and analysis, we think that we need to bring together different networks to start trying to see what the synergies could potentially be. We've developed a tool that can help OEMs, for example, understand what their inbound transportation flows are in relation to their outbound transportation flows. Because up to this point in history, nobody has really had a need to know this. And today, we can take your data, your inbound data and your outbound data, and throw it into this tool, and it'll think about it and process it and come up with a relationship between those two flows. Two flows that are traditionally managed by two completely separate silos, inbound and outbound, of course. But we can also put in general freight flows, non-automotive flows altogether, and figure out how we can bring automotive logistics closer to general freight logistics as well, without losing the specialization of the existing auto carrier methodology today. So once again, what goes in, it comes out of every auto manufacturing plant in the world. 30,000 parts on average in a vehicle, and they all have to come in the front door and out the back door, of course. Everybody's familiar with these sites. So what is that relationship? That's what we want to determine. Network planning and optimization. Again, bringing these two networks together has not traditionally or typically been done, and now we are actually doing it, because I believe that this is going to help us figure out how to utilize multi-purpose equipment. These are identical pieces of equipment. We have one standing outside, and we've got a partial freight load on it and some automobiles on it. It's a very simple concept. In some cases, we're finding that we don't have direct returns from our destination, but we might have to take a certain amount of distance, create triangles perhaps, to find our return loads. But at the end of the day, as long as it's a net gain, everybody in the room will benefit. Everybody in the industry will benefit, and the consumer ultimately will benefit. So the whole is perhaps more than the sum of its parts. This is the message here that I believe needs to be identified by everybody. We did this in our own fleet, and we were able to reduce empty miles from 40% to less than 5%. We made millions of dollars from this because your return loads typically have a much higher margin. And that margin can perhaps be shared amongst all the participants here in the room. I'll do a little segue here. Can't see the forest for the trees. There's a little example here that we have. And of course, this is a young Canadian kid, 15 years old. Maybe some of you know this story. William Gaudry from Quebec, young fella studying science, doing a science project, decided that he wanted to understand the relationship between stars in our constellation and the relationship to the location of Mayan cities. And he was connecting them because this is an actual study, and it does actually exist. And he found out that there was a city that was missing, an ancient Mayan city that was missing, and why hasn't it been identified? Maybe the Mayans made a mistake. But then he went and got some help from the science community, and they zoomed in on an area, as identified here by the blue and the red circles, that right where this thing is supposed to be, actually is something. And so he was recognized for having extrapolated this information just because he looked at it from a different perspective, and the entire science community was surprised by this because it made perfect sense. Now, maybe that's just a big square rock, who knows? But they're going to determine that this year, apparently. But here's a kid that's just thinking outside the box, and I just find it tremendously inspirational that he's seeing things that us who are entrenched in our everyday processes and systems, we're so entrenched in it we can't see beyond it, I believe. I'm no different. And I think it's truly great that we have new people, youth coming up, and we need to take advantage of that and nurture it and help continue to develop it. Amazing story. This one really resonates with me. I believe it's all about whatever we think, whatever we believe, it can happen. Whatever we can imagine, it can happen. We just don't know yet all the components to making it happen. If you think you can do it or not do it, you're probably right. We refer to this as turn and burn, out full, come back empty. We want to change that adage to turn and earn, turn and offer productivity, better use of our very expensive assets. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bill. As usual, thought-provoking and challenging presentation. Always looking to sort of, challenge the status quo here. I think maybe the most miraculous thing is that you seem to have got Congress to agree on something. So I think, that's probably what I took away from it. We'll have our Q&A, but before we do, I'd like to give some of our other speakers a chance to maybe say, kind of introduce themselves or have some opening remarks. So I thought maybe, Dennis, you want to kind of briefly reintroduce yourself. I know you're quite shy, so if you can.
You did a good job of that already. Anyway, hey, I'm glad to see everybody here. Good turnout for this conference. I'm a big believer in this conference. This is our industry's conference, by the way. And so your participation today, frankly, is great. I mean, I've been coming to this thing, Christopher, for probably 8, 9, 10 years. And it's never failed where you always meet a lot of new people within the industry, different parts of the industry. And it's never failed where I haven't encountered a lot of great conversations. And that's the whole purpose of these conferences, is to connect all the different parts, from top to bottom of finished vehicles. And so your participation here is awesome. So, it's great to have seen this thing grow over the years. I think we've had probably the most exhibits I've seen at this, so that's awesome. But I left Honda about a year ago, and I'm now with Road and Rail Services in Louisville, Kentucky, and excited to be there. And if you're not familiar with Road and Rail, it's just like the name says. Somebody was a genius who named it. Half of our business, we have the automotive piece, and then the other half is kind of the rail piece. So we do a lot of automotive handling with the major OEMs. And then we do a lot of rail maintenance and repair, track repair, this type of thing. We do a lot of different commodities handling for different commodities. So a lot of variation with our book of business, frankly. And that's just kind of a brief overview. And so I'm their Chief Commercial Officer. We have a couple other members of the team here, and looking forward to the panel discussion today. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Dennis. Lee, maybe you want to talk us a little bit about, from your perspective, some of the network issues for Nissan.
Sure. So my name is Lee Hansen, for the folks that don't know me. I work for Nissan. I work in our procurement department, purchasing department, and despite what rumors around here or Louis says, we're not all bad people. I mean, we work with all the major carriers and, in our network. And to us, when we think about networks, we think about how the best way we can get our product to the dealers, and working very closely with the carriers, we need to understand their networks as well. So we look at it a couple of different ways. We look at it internally and externally, and what I mean by internally, we have a 3PL that we work with. Our supply chain management team also we work with, so we're like a three-headed monster that we put together and collaborate and look at our network internally to see, from import situation, which ports do we come into? Do we come, from the West Coast or from the East Coast? What's our most optimal point of entry from our, for the import stuff? From Mexico, we look at, how much do we put on the rail? We use short sea as well, so we look at those networks and how that works to get our product to the coast and then up, throughout the U.S. And then, of course, at our plants, how far out do we truck? When do we put it on rail? Those are some of the things that we talk about. So, we work internally, like I said, with our 3PL and supply chain to find the best ways to do that. Externally, we meet with our carriers regularly. Whether it's the rail carriers or whether it's the truck carriers, we bring them in and we discuss, where are you guys at? What are you guys doing? We look at, the different networks, and, Bill's got a great idea, and to us, we look at it, we've met with him and see if there's a niche there that might help. But we also look with the carriers, where do they go? So, from our plants, how far out do they go? Where do they have backhauls from other OEMs? And then we're also working closely with, other OEMs sometimes. We're collaborating with them and just bouncing ideas off of to see where we can tighten up the networks. So to us, when we can optimize stuff, to us, it's a good cost solution. Obviously, I'm in purchasing, so that's my main job. But we also want to make sure we have the capacity, and we also want to make sure that we have the service for the dealers. So there's a lot of different things that go into the network makeup of how we do things, but we are working every day, to make it optimal, to make sure the dealer gets his product on time. And that's what we do.
Great, thanks, Lee. Luca, maybe you can also give us a little state of the nation.
So my name is Luca Kolcaj. I'm responsible for the outbound network at FCA. I've been in the current role for about 3.5 years now. I think for the folks in this room, we've been through quite a ride over the last 3 years with the shortages that we've experienced in 2014 and for most of 2015. 2016, we're off to a great start. And I think it's a result of all the investments and the capital investments from both the rail and the truck. And I think all of that is coming to fruition. And the network's in a much better place. If you look at where we were in 2014 from an OEM standpoint of the shippable count, being over 200,000 vehicles to being below standard today is really the result of all the hard work that everybody in this room has done and the investment that they've done into the network. For us in 2016, optimization, collaboration, transparency, it's what we're doing this year and we continue to do. We've done co-loading at multiple rail ramps. The visibility that we now have, we also use a 3PL. We have increased visibility to the network that provides us where there's a potential issue. We're able to react faster. I think for most of us over the last few years, as the SARS increases every year for over 1 million vehicles, I think it's hard to look at where those inefficiencies are. It's really a survival mode. I know from my standpoint, there were many nights in 2014 that I didn't sleep. In 2016, I think we've got a great opportunity to look at where those inefficiencies are, drive those inefficiencies, optimizing the network, empty miles. I know we've optimized numerous routes in the FCA network by reducing our empty miles. So I think it's something that we're going to continue to look at, and I think we're in a steady state where we've got an opportunity to really look at the network and drive those inefficiencies out.
Okay. So thanks to everyone on the panel for your presentation and remarks. Now you've gotten a sense of, let's say, the state of the nation of capacity and network optimization right now. The floor is now open for questions. I'm very glad to hear that Luca's been getting a good night's sleep, but I hope you're not having your sleep here now. So let's hopefully you're all going to wake up and participate. But if not, I'll kick us off. I mean, Bill, you started, so I think it's fair. I'll put the first question to you. And you've talked a lot about these sort of optimization tools to look at the kind of overlaying the network, those heat maps that you showed about where the flows go. Have you any sense as yet about where your type of solution might actually be most effective for the automotive industry? And if, in fact, the most effectiveness might actually come between automotive and other industries, for example? Because I can imagine, and I was talking with Lee about this a bit earlier, that some inbound flows in particular are very tightly routed through milk runs or consolidation centers that OEMs might not be so keen to see disrupted in any way. So maybe you can give us some insight on that.
Thanks for the question, Chris. And yes, you're absolutely right. There are a lot of sensitivities on the inbound side as there is on the outbound side. And those sensitivities all have to be addressed. We try to prioritize or categorize perhaps all of the opportunities, the inbound and outbound opportunities. One area of opportunity we are finding in multiple situations around the world is exports to ports and return containers. So containers with parts going right back to the same OEM, whether it's for the OEM themselves, so VW shipping out and VW coming back, that does exist. But then also being able to compare their outbound flows to the port against some of the inbound other OEMs flows as well. Now, none of that guarantees that there's going to be a direct synergy, but you have to go through the process, and that's what we're doing right now, is identifying the process, exactly what is possible. First, we need to understand the relationship of the flows, and then start drilling deeper into it. And that's where we're at right now. But there's some real obvious gains, especially on the export to port side and coming back with containers of parts and perhaps other flat deck products. We also know and have identified totally non-industry related returns. And we have interest, and this is the exciting part, is totally non-automotive industries that are offering to share their data with us to understand how it relates to automotive outbound logistics. It's happening, and there's full willingness to do it, and I find it very refreshing. So we don't know specifically every situation how we have to decipher it or analyze it or rebuild it, but we have to sometimes go back up the supply chain a step or two or three even, and figure out how we are going to deal with the containers when they arrive to the plant. How are we going to do this? Because right now, those are being managed by existing transport groups and yard managers, and perhaps we have to set up a different business model that manages those containers when they come in and how those containers go back into the system. And so but the great part is these dialogues are happening, and I see progress. We see areas of go and areas of no-go, and there's lots of areas of go. In Europe, for example, we took all of the historic flows of automotive for 12 million units in Europe for 2014, and we compared those against engines for one of the OEMs. And immediately we found there was 8,000 loads that were potentially able to be paired up with outbound hulls. We decided to do all engines and transmissions, and all of a sudden we've got 42,000 loads that actually intersected with outbound flows. Now, we are in the process of taking that the next step and understanding, okay, what can work in these flows? So we're learning every day, and we can't stress that enough. It's with everyone's participation in this that this thing is going to be successful, because there's no way that we have the experience you guys do in your own specific situations. Hopefully that answers your question a bit.
Thanks, Bill. I wondered if any of the car makers on the panel might comment. I don't want to make it all about CTM, obviously, but I mean, does it ring true for you that there would be these sort of opportunities, maybe particularly at ports or places like that, where right now maybe you've just accepted some of the inefficiencies that you have right now, or doesn't quite work for yours? Now, maybe Lee, if you want to comment.
I think from our perspective, the export-import that Bill was talking about, that could be the niche that we're looking at. We were talking earlier about our product in Mexico that goes to Veracruz and then comes up short sea. There could be an opportunity there, you know, for containers of parts coming back into the plants. So it depends, and it's, like I said, it's the niche areas that we look at. It's more probably import, export, those areas, maybe closer to the ports. Smyrna, where our plant is, and we're exporting on the East Coast into Georgia and stuff, so there could be opportunity there. So yeah, we're exploring those ideas, but also at the same time we got to be careful with, you know, our carrier networks, the way they're working today, because, you know, a certain carrier may be going in a certain area, but they may also be working for another OEM coming back the other way. So, you know, there's a balance there, and we want to make sure that we keep that balance, but we're always open to new ideas, and we're always looking to, you know, new ways of optimizing our network, and it's a possibility.
Okay. Yeah. Any questions or points from the audience? Thank you very much. We have a question right there. The mic come behind. If you could say your name and company.
Hi there, Christopher. I'm Bill Robbins with Trans Development, and I'd like to ask a question about infrastructure, about physical infrastructure. It's a little bit different than speaking purely of trucking, but for the OEM representatives, and I think that includes Dennis because you spent so many years working with Honda, what do you guys see happening and what's on your radar when it comes to the facilities that you need to have in order for you to distribute your finished vehicles? We're seeing so many interesting things happening over the years with shuttles from plants to off-site locations that are railheads like Dennis initiated with Honda in Talladega. We have, Nissan with this incredible history with DOS and the facilities that you had. Chrysler has all kinds of interesting initiatives with respect to vehicles that are imported and exported and also plant-based improvements that change the way that you're distributing. What do you all think about that and what's happening? What should we be thinking about for the people that need to provide you with facilities and physical properties for you to function in?
Now, I know from an FCA perspective, our import programs have continued to grow over the last couple of years, and with the introduction of the Alpha model, I know our procurement team, our network design and strategy team, we continue to look at additional ports to bring in those vehicles and to distribute from. We continue to work with our rail carriers and the need for expansion at certain destination ramps where we see a distribution change and volume change from that perspective. So I think it's a continuous look at the network and really forecasting and understanding where the markets and where the growth is to understand where that capital investment needs to be looked at and spent.
And additionally to that, I mean, the ports, there's only so much land that they have at the port, so you're landlocked and trying to find excess space. I know we work with our 3PL very closely, so when we have, the volume increases of the way they come in at the port, or you have a diversion, or you have, bunching of vehicles coming in, sometimes there's not enough space on the site that we have, so we have to go off-site. So we rely on our 3PL, and we're all the time doing studies of, like Luca said, new ports. We're all the time talking about new ports. Where can we go, maybe, reach a different segment of the market. So, yeah, the land part of it from the port is pretty interesting. And, it's landlocked, so you got to go out from there. And then we have some off-sites that we shuttle to and store them there. But that's costly, too, so we got to be careful with that. So it's interesting.
All right, I'll jump in. I think it's one of the most overlooked opportunities with any OEM or any service provider. That piece of land or that configuration of your facility, if it's not good, if it's not flowing right, if it's not laid out right, you're going to pay for that for the next 20, 25, 30 years because that's the amount of time you have in these facilities, right? It's not a 3-year lease or a 5-year lease, right? Generally, it's a 20, 25, 30-year commitment. And everything is based off of that layout, right? And so if you have an inherently bad piece of property or a bad flow, a bad layout, all your labor, all the other service providers are based off of that. And so, any chance for efficiencies or optimization is going to be a challenge. And it's a challenge for the life that you're there at that property. So, I think huge opportunity within finished vehicles, to take a look at the facilities you operate out of to see, what can be done, what should be done, or, take some risk. You got to step out of the box sometimes and see what other choices are out there. And it's easy to say no. A lot of people are comfortable with no because nothing changes when you say no. But if you say yes, let's take a chance at this. That's when the risk comes into. But that's when you start evaluating the risk, right? The rewards off of it. But I think with every you know, everyone in the room here with your part of that business, big opportunity there.
I do think it's a very good point and a complex one. Luca mentioned the sort of struggle for capacity, for capital. We know this is a capital-intensive industry. We know there are some capital junkies that sort of categorize aspects of it. But my experience with the plant tends to be, as it grows, logistics is one of the first to get pushed out, right? So whether it's the parts handling or yard space. I mean, how I want to say easy, but I mean, do you see, well, this is for the OEMs to comment, do you see any progress in sort of being able to have those internal dialogues across functions to sort of maybe make those cases why investment in a yard or redesigning a yard or adding a rail spur or whatever, which might cost millions of dollars, which maybe they'd rather think they're going to put in an autonomous vehicle or a new technology? I mean, do you see any, is that kind of a lost cause from the start, or are you seeing some progress in having those sort of internal discussions?
There's nothing like silence.
Yeah, well,
Usually gives you all you need to know.
you know, there's investment. I guess it's just the working with your partners and working on our, I know there's some extensive work being done in the Detroit area, you know, on rail capacity and just with the expansion of some of our facilities and the products that we plan on putting into the Detroit, some of our Detroit facilities. And I know the railroads are making the investment. There's construction being done now to expand, to be able to bring in additional rail cars when needed and to be able to handle the business. So.
And I think from our standpoint, yeah, we look at that too. For some of our facilities, we look to see if there's a way to expand the rail sites to get more rail cars in there as well. But we rely on, you know, you guys to come with us solutions and help us figure out how we can get more capacity out of our plants and our rail sites and stuff.
And I just make one comment on it. That, you know, that land acquisition happens once. So when you reconfigure your yard or you're making a new acquisition, that land purchase happens once. But that cost per unit of that handling that vehicle happens every day, every few seconds. And so that's where if you make poor decisions or you start to take shortcuts with it, you're going to pay for that for a long period of time. And obviously that's going to exceed the cost of doing it right the first time.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else want to chime in? Questions or comments? Another one from my side then. Luca, you mentioned the some kind of positive figures, if you like, where the low shippable counts and sort of, let's say, the effectiveness of the network right now. But is the network efficient, or is it just kind of lucky because of some of the, let's say, other changes that I kind of mentioned in the beginning, the commodity shift, so there's more available service perhaps on the railroads, a low oil price, which is driving some costs down. How much visibility do you actually have across your network to say, right, you know, we're running this empty, or this can be improved, if you see what I'm saying? So where is the, do you actually, is the network as efficient as it is running well right now?
You know, for one, I don't think it's lunky. I think the folks in this room, we spent quite a bit of time planning and working closely with our rail and truck partners. There's been a lot of investments that have been made over the last year and a half, and I think that's what we're seeing today. I think the network's running better than it's ran over the last 2 to 3 years. I think we do have visibility to our empty miles. We do have a 3PL that tracks that monitors that. That's what our network optimization team looks at, is where are those opportunities that we can collaborate with another OEM, working with our truck partners, rail partners, to understand where there's an opportunity to optimize our network and drive those inefficiencies out.
I can add to that, you know, we do the same. We're working very closely with our carriers as well, understanding their network and making sure that, you know, even within our business itself, we may have a set of business going a certain direction, another set of business from a railroad coming back to that. And we have a few of our carriers that have that network where it's going back and forth and making it very efficient for them. But at the same time, we got to be aware of other OEMs and what they're doing for them, you know, if they happen to lose that piece of business, what's that do? Because now your head haul, your back haul is inefficient. So we try to stay on top of that with our carriers and understand, you know, what they're doing on a daily basis and a yearly basis as it changes, as the volumes grow, or as you know, networks change, not just with ourselves but with other OEMs. How does that affect our carrier base? And we try to, you know, work with them and make sure that they're efficient, because, you know, when you guys are efficient, it cuts our costs down too. So.
Thank you. Do you think that the industry, or let's say the pricing structure, is set up in a way that it can be as efficient as possible? I mean, if you're, for example, paying per unit, does that encourage you to really drive as much efficiency as possible into your network?
I think so. I mean, that's the way we look at it. The CPU works well with the way we look at things, and it drives down to, you know, once we have a CPU, so we know what it is to deliver that car to that specific dealer, we can look at what our total cost is from there. Of course, fuel being so low actually helps us as well. We're at a good point in time where the fuel has gone down over the last year, and, you know, the total delivered cost as we see it is beneficial because of that. And, you know, like I said, the CPU to us, I think is a good cost measure.
For me, I know there's a lot of discussions from our procurement team and network design teams to understand what the network looks like for the various carriers, the haul-away carriers, and to understand which lanes make sense for them. So I know we've made over the last year multiple changes within our network to understand where there's an opportunity, where are they running back empty, and create a route where optimizing their truck to as closely as possible to 100%. So there's multiple changes, and multiple times we're looking at that and bringing in our carriers to understand, you know, where could you help us out? And they generally provide good feedback, and then we run the numbers and we look at our network to see where we can fit them in. And it's a win-win for both.
Okay, yes.
Thank you. This is to Luca. I mean, we may be getting off topic a little bit, but I wanted to ask so much. What is the long-term strategy for Chrysler in the exportation of vehicles from North America to parts of the world? Where do you see that going? Is that a growing thing, or is it something that is just a segment of time where this has been such a big deal for you and an opportunity?
No. With our joining with Fiat, I think has opened up multiple doors for us globally. If you look at our export volumes, they have come down over the last couple of years. We're opening up new facilities. We've got partnerships and joint ventures in China where we're building, you know, Jeep products for the market over there. We've opened up facilities, you know, the Pernambuco plant in Brazil. So I think depending on the market and the need, I think that's where the strategy is going to go. I think we're going to continue to export vehicles. Obviously, there's vehicles that are built here that we won't localize in other countries. You know, our Grand Cherokee, our Wrangler, those are our bread and butter products that we currently export. Not saying that one day, depending on the market, that we may localize that vehicle somewhere. Could happen. We've done it in Venezuela. We built the Grand Cherokee over there for that small market. But yeah, it's all dependent on the market. But our numbers are generally, they have come down, but we're opening up facilities and manufacturing facilities in those regions that there's a strong market demand.
Thank you for that. Looking a little at Mexico for a moment. I mean, SCA is making some big changes with a version of the Jeep going into Luca. Obviously, Nissan, huge already in Mexico with more to come with Infinity. I wondered if in the short to medium term, you're looking at any notable changes in the way that your current network is working, whether it's the balance between rail and short sea or other methods.
So, you know, we're not creating a new facility, right? We're just replacing product. So from a network change from a bi-level, tri-level at the current Toluca facility, there hasn't been a major change from that perspective. But even with the expansion of Mexico, I think, you know, we build a ProMaster van down in Mexico, and we truck that direct to dealer. We're looking at short C. We've initiated short C. And I think with the expansion, I think the OEMs, we're all going to look at opportunities and options to move our vehicles and get them to dealers. So I think both rail, truck direct, and short C are just going to be needed and required as the volumes increase down in Mexico.
And from our perspective, we have a new plant going in August that's going to add some more volume. We're doing a joint venture down there. We utilize the rail and short C as well, so as that shifts or the volume increases, we look at both of which way is the better way to get to the market of the U.S. We truck domestically throughout, but the volume is growing. Like you said, the infrastructure is not all together there, or you know, can cause some bottlenecks, but we're working very closely with our rail partners as well to make sure that, you know, our Mexico product is going to flow up here.
And I think additionally for FCA, if you look at our network 3 to 4 years ago, we were predominantly rail out of Mexico. I think with the ProMaster van out of Saltillo, a direct truck from the facility, I think with the initiation of the short C that we now have in place, it gives us options. That if one plant falls behind or one network isn't performing as needed to get our vehicles, we can utilize one of the other networks to get our vehicles to final dealer.
Mm-hmm. Dennis, you obviously had a lot of experience with Mexico in Honda, but I mean, is Mexico important now for road and rail services as well? And what do you see as a sort of important areas that maybe you'll be looking to invest in or target further?
I should disclose that now. So. You know, we're not in Mexico right now. Right. I mean, there's obviously a lot going on, a lot of opportunity. You know, we've talked about that at this conference before. There's so much complexity down there in all aspects of our businesses, you know. It's great to have great partners. When you go down there, you pick a good dance partner and everything goes a lot smoother. And but even your best days a little challenging at times down there. But you know, for us personally, we're not down there. You know, we keep a close eye on it, obviously, just because of the growth charts that we saw earlier. You know, the dynamics of it are just amazing, and it's going to just continue to evolve. And everybody in this room is, you know, whether you're in Mexico or not, you're kind of in Mexico because there is a connectivity to all of it. And so, you know, it's exciting. It's exciting.
Yeah. Actually just back from Mexico myself, and one of the things that's most surprising down there at the moment is actually the fast growth of imports from, for example, Asia, and the domestic market growing 20% or something like that. So it's so sometimes the expectation is not what we thought. We have another question right here.
I think just to jump in, so if Mr. Trump gets elected, it'd be interesting to see him to reverse the Mexican auto industry. So, I mean, that ship has sailed. I mean, it's a huge, important part of the North American automotive industry, and well, it should be. I mean, so.
I think if Kansas City Southern just gets enough run up, they can crash right through the wall, so it should be fine.
Kurt Watson with Nissan North America. As has been alluded to, one of the biggest risks to the network that we see in Mexico is the haul-away capacity. And when we talk to our carriers in Mexico, they're reluctant to add more trucks to the network because, and one of the biggest things they tell us is because of the peso devaluation. They buy all their equipment from the U.S., and they've seen a 40% devaluation in the peso, so those trucks that they're buying, the equipment they're buying is costing them a lot more money now to add, and so I think there's kind of a wait-and-see attitude. We'll wait and see if the peso gets back to 12 before we go and buy a lot more trucks. But from the information we saw this morning, with the labor rates being the way that they are in Mexico, I guess my question to Bill and maybe to some of the other truck builders, equipment builders, is there any incentive for U.S. truck builders to build equipment in Mexico? I mean, we feel like we're going to see a lot of trucks that have to be added to that network with all the capacity that's coming on. Being that that's a concern, is there any benefit to building in Mexico?
Thanks, Kurt, for the question. I probably can't answer this question as well as the direct truck builders can. We are a company, of course, that is promoting the concept and has the intellectual property behind it, et cetera, and the process. That's what we're working on. The actual building of the equipment, I mean, we've talked to various manufacturers and been in constant discussions with them. How they control the currency is really their business. So I'm not the right guy to talk about this. The Cottrell people are here. They can certainly answer those questions. So that's the most insight I can offer you at this point.
Short of finding them or trying to answer on behalf, I will only say that at our Mexico conference, I think we have a fair amount of interest, people coming and looking at all kinds of opportunities are there, and I think it's an excellent point. I mean, the haul-away capacity, 5 to 10% short of the market as far as the figures that I've seen, and the peso devaluation is certainly holding some of that back. So any other questions, points? Oh, sorry, I haven't mentioned, we've got a few on this side. We'll start with Brian.
Hi, Brian Mason with Pasha Automotive Services. Question both for probably Lee and Luca, but Lee brought up earlier, and I appreciate you bringing it up, that one of the challenges that some of the OEMs face is when they're coming into crowded port operations, that land is scarce, and sometimes we have to go out and find additional land for offsite storage. When you do that, from the marine terminal perspective, we really have two ways to go on that, and that is we can either ask the OEM to participate in some of the development of that land and acquisition of that land for their use, or we can ask for longer-term commitment and volume from that OEM so that we can make that investment and know that we're going to have the support for that. Which of those two methods, or is there a third method that that you guys would prefer from your perspectives?
We're not, I mean, longer term option could work. It just depends on, you know, the cost, of course. With the land being locked and then having to go out, we're relying on our 3PL to help us find that land, but sometimes we may have, I had a carrier approach me the other day saying they had an idea for that. So we're open to ideas of where we can go, and if longer term is what we need to do. I'm not so sure if the OEMs, you know, from a cost perspective is, you know, investing at this time, but I mean, anything's an option at this point.
For us, it's a balance, and when there's a need for additional space, it's outside of standard, right? There was a situation that occurred, whether it's vessel bunching or there was a quality hold, and now you've got an influx of vehicles arriving into the ports, that, you know, we really lean on our partners to provide options for us, and I think we've got, you know, with Pasha, we've got an opportunity, and we're moving forward with supplemental space, as I would call it, when those situations do arise, and we come to terms with an agreement and how that would be used and how it would be paid for. But I don't, you know, to Lee's point, I don't think we're in a position to buy and invest in supplemental property. Just something that we're probably not interested in.
Got a few more questions over here. We'll put out.
Al Cardona again from BMW. A question for Luca regarding your comments earlier about capacity in 2014, a little better right now. Also for the colleagues from Nissan, do you see that the market is now saturated with trucking companies, or do you think there's room for new companies to enter the market, specific for vehicle car hauling?
Yeah, I think specifically for car hauling, I haven't been in a situation yet this year where I needed a truck and I couldn't get it to where I needed to be. I think there's capacity out there. I think as we optimize the network and drive the inefficiencies out, I think it frees up additional capacity. So I think the investment that's been made over the last couple years, I think we see it today with the current state of the network. I don't think there's a need for additional investment in equipment at this time, from my perspective, and what I've seen so far for the first half of the year.
So what about for Mexico? The same question on the Mexican side.
So Mexico's a little bit different. From predominantly, FCA's network has been rail outside of Mexico. The ProMaster, we utilize a flatbed. It's a little bit different. We've got a great partner down there that's been extremely successful. With the Short Sea initiative, we're going to be utilizing haulaway a little bit more. We haven't seen any shortages. We've got a number of providers that we're able to provide a quote and provide their assistance. So in the future, as we continue to grow, if we continue to utilize Short Sea, if we continue to utilize direct truck out of Mexico, there could be a need, but at this time, from an FCA perspective, there's not really a need.
From a Nissan perspective, to Kurt's point earlier, the capacity for the domestic Mexico is very tight. We're seeing that when we tried to, do our last bid and get the capacity we need there. So I think from Nissan's perspective, getting more capacity in Mexico with those volumes growing, I think that is a need for us. For the U.S., I think the capacity is out there. We have several carriers that we work with, and they have come to us, and to Luca's point, the inefficiencies have been driven out, and they've come to us with new ideas of ways we can do it. So for the U.S., I think for now the capacity is there for us. Over the last, we go back 2 years ago, our March Madness push, it was a nightmare. And then just trying to get the capacity to get our vehicles out. And then full circle, 2 years later, this year, I got the comment that March wasn't really that bad. I mean, yes, there's struggles every month in or every quarter in or every year in, but it was much better from a capacity standpoint in the U.S. this year than maybe 2 years ago.
Thanks for that. We'll move to the question towards the back there.
Hey, William Malden with Auto Carrier Express. In our discussions of, and this is just a comment, not really a question, but I see the pictures of networks and whatnot drawn, and we talk about efficiencies and revenue per mile and things like that. But in all my years of coming to this, we've never talked about revenue per week. And in a trucking company, sales per week are just as important, if not more important, than revenue per mile. I could have an awesome revenue per mile, and my revenue per week can tank. There's a variable of time that needs to be considered. At a macro level, love network efficiencies, want to drive them and all that. At a micro level, the time that it takes a driver to run somewhere and convert a truck or drop his skids, even if he's not converting, and pick up a load and then go back to his home terminal needs to be considered, particularly if you're running electronic logbooks and running an illegal outfit. We've been running electronic logs for years, and sometimes a 2 or 3 hour delay in a piece of equipment can impact a driver's pay by 15, 20% on a week. And that has to be made up somewhere in order for his pay to be linear, if you will, throughout the year. So all that to say, that's just a comment. And I don't know if there's any reflection on that, but there's revenue per week is an important variable, not just revenue per mile. So anyway.
Chris,
yeah, please.
William, I have a perspective on this. I used to run my own transportation company, and I certainly take your point and get your point that critical mass is exactly that. It's critical. You need a certain amount of revenue. When it comes to the concept of convertibility or multi-purpose equipment, we were involved previously in longer distance transportation, and this is where it really helped us. That's where the concept shone, because 2 hours to reload at the end of a 1,000-kilometer run was no big deal. And usually the drivers would catch up with each other. If a conventional guy was running parallel to our convertible, they've more or less ran the same schedule. But on your tight runs and tight turns, it's going to be much more challenging. And so my comment to that is we're probably not ready yet to start attacking the short runs. I think the most important part is that we identify the easy gains, the low-hanging fruit, if you will, and not try to disrupt what you're talking about. You need continuous revenue, you need a critical mass, and that's well understood. But I don't think the concept of convertibility is an enemy of that. I think we just have to perhaps dig further up the chain and understand what we have to change, perhaps at the shipper's end, and the timing, and et cetera. Figure out what the problems are and solve them one step at a time.
I don't know if anyone else want to reflect on that point. Or no reflecting on this panel. Do we have another hand up in that corner somewhere or anywhere else? Oh, yeah, sorry. We'll take another question.
Yeah, I have one. Again, Carlos Turon with Transdevelopment. We're making too many calls, but this is an interesting topic for us. We have been discussing, by the way, a comment about the peso. The peso is not going to improve because it's, for the last 50, 60 years, it just devaluates and it never goes back to an acceptable level. So just be aware of that. And I'm from Mexico, so I guess I know a little bit about it. We have been talking about improving the network, routes, type of cargo, modes of transportation, et cetera, et cetera. And Bill talked about a business model. If the business model is right, are the OEMs willing or open to share transportation assets or facility assets? For instance, ports. Most of the ports are landlocked already. But if you go to a port, it's segregated. There is one OEM here, another OEM there, and sometimes one is using 100% capacity of what he has or the OEM has, and the other one is 30%. But since they have agreements with the port and they have agreements with the service providers, they cannot use or share their assets. If the business model is right, some kind of a third party or something, are the OEMs willing to really share those assets? Because that's one of the issues that we see in order to improve not just facilities, or it's improve everything that we're talking about.
I'll jump in. Carlos, in my previous life, that was on the table, and no, seriously, and it's one of those things. You have to protect your business first and foremost. So you have to look at what your schedule of events are and what's happening in your world at that moment. But yeah, there's a lot of times that you might have that opportunity, and it's a negotiated thing. But we would get approached periodically from different friendly competitors, and if we didn't have the need and they had to, we would work with them. And so, but it depends. It's a case by case deal, and now you go back to the economic downturn when you had some excess product and stuff, and at that time probably not. But it's just depends upon where you are in your sales cycle and this type of thing.
Yeah, I would add to that, and we would look at that as an option. But to the point, if we got our own product that we got to get out, that would be a last resort. But we're looking with other OEMs and talking of certain areas that they have product going a certain way and we have product going, the opposite way. That means we'll collaborate with them and see if there's a way that we could, work that together. So we're open to the idea.
And I think the port processors do a really good job as far as understanding the fluctuation of volumes by OEM, and when we're over our footprint, to allow us and provide timing on, you can have this space for a month, but knowing that in a month this OEM will require it back. So I think they do a good job balancing it, understanding their customers and their needs, and as long as they're meeting the needs contractually for each of the different OEMs, it's a balance that they manage, and I think they do a pretty good job of it.
And while we're on the subject of the C word, as I think we've been calling it sometimes at this conference with collaboration, you probably blink there for a second. Are you doing more or open to more co-loading from locations across your network on truck, for example?
For truck, we are. We've worked collaboratively with other OEMs at destination ramps. even at rail ramps for low running routes, working with the OEMs, working with our rail partners to understand which routes are difficult to build with just one OEM, and where we can, capitalize on the available equipment and to get the vehicles moving into network and not let them dwell at destination ramps, at origin ramps. So.
I think, we're doing some of the similar stuff too, where we see the co-loading, especially at the smaller ramps and where you don't have enough volume to go on to those faraway dealers. So it only makes sense to co-load when you're going to the same way. So we do a little bit of that as well.
Okay. We're kind of coming near the end here. If there's any last question, I'll give you one more chance. If anybody's dying, just put the hand up. Maybe you're just hungry. So on that note, then, I want to thank our panel one more time for a great discussion. We'd be very pleased to have you join us now at the Montway-hosted lunch. This is back through the hotel. There'll be signs pointing you along the way. So it's back through the hotel and then to the right.